I always say that I never sang any style of music that I hadn't heard in my household growing up. I can't approach it with any kind of authenticity.
Los Angeles, 1979. The troubadour buzzed with pre-show chaos, guitar strings humming through final sound checks, whispered jokes bouncing between cracked green room walls, and glasses clinking in back hallways. Then suddenly, silence.
Know Jim Morrison.
I don't think I got to know him. He was a very moody kind of a distant guy. I didn't want to get too close to him.
Through the backstage corridor, face pale, Linda Ronstadt had just stormed out. No words, no confrontation, just a quiet, defiant exit, triggered by a single name on the lineup. It wasn't her name, not the Eagles. It was his. And for decades, no one knew why that night mattered. Why that moment etched itself into the lore of rock history. Until now, Linda Ronstadt has always been revered not just for her voice, but for her grace. Through 5 decades, she never fed the tabloids, never chased headlines. She let the music speak. And maybe that's why what she's revealing now hits so hard. At 78, Linda has finally broken her silence, lifting the curtain on the 7 musicians she could never forgive. The ones who bruised her trust, mocked her craft, and tested her dignity. These weren't harmless backstage feuds or momentary disagreements. These were emotional fractures that shaped her, and the industry. And the names? They're the last ones you'd expect. It began with someone close. Too close. A drummer who she once gave everything to. His first real break, her stage, her spotlight. In the early 70s, Don Henley was Linda's backup singer and drummer, just a quiet guy behind the kit. She was the headliner, the star, the one selling out shows coast to coast. But the moment the Eagles took flight, everything changed. Fame bloated Henley's ego. He walked with a new kind of strut, no longer the grateful bandmate, but a self-declared royalty. The shift was subtle at first, dismissive comments, cold shoulders, but then came the knife. In 1975, backstage at the Universal Amphitheater, he joked to a group of label reps that Linda should stick to singing covers and leave songwriting to the real artists. The words weren't just sharp, they were surgical. They cut through years of loyalty in an instant. Linda revoked his tour credentials on the spot. No second chances, no need for shouting, just silence. But behind that silence, something shattered. Not just a friendship, but the illusion that talent always respects talent. The next wound was louder, public, and devastating. In 1968, the Doors were kings of chaos, and Jim Morrison, their reckless frontman, was both idol and storm. At a private after-party near the Whiskey A Go-Go, Morrison spotted Linda. Several drinks in, shirt half unbuttoned, ego spilling into every corner of the room, he pulled her on stage without warning. It wasn't playful, it was predatory. Mid-song, he leaned in for an uninvited kiss. She pulled back. He stumbled, knocked into her mic stand, and nearly toppled the entire set. The room held its breath. No footage exists, but the moment lived on through whispers and late-night vinyl spins. Months later, Morrison mocked her on live radio, calling her sweet but spineless. Linda didn't respond, not publicly, but privately she called him a brilliant wreck, a symbol of the toxic masculinity that tried to claim every stage and silence every woman. He wasn't just another bad night. He was a reminder of everything she had to fight through. But some wounds go deeper than ego and spotlight. Some feel like betrayal at the soul level. In 1976, a benefit concert for farm workers brought Linda and Neil Young together, two icons with a shared passion for activism. But the alliance crumbled under the weight of ego. Neil dismissed her set suggestions, blocked her from performing certain songs, and after the show told reporters she wasn't built for protest. The implication stung. Fake. Hollow. A commercial product in a movement of real grit. Linda left in tears. She thought they stood for the same things, that music and message could coexist. But in that moment, she learned otherwise. She never shared a stage with Neil again. Privately, she would say his causes were noble, but his methods were cruel. That kind of judgment didn't just bruise, it rewrote the way she approached every future collaboration. The next hit came from someone she admired, someone whose mind stretched boundaries, but whose mouth could break spirits. Frank Zappa. Their 1974 meeting was electric on paper. Zappa, the mad genius of experimental rock, and Linda, a vocal powerhouse defying genre norms. She showed real interest in one of his tracks. But once inside the studio, things turned. Zappa mocked her suggestions, sneering that her sound was sanitized. He accused her of watering down art, turning raw expression into something suited for soda commercials. During rehearsal, he stopped the band mid-track, looked around the room, and said, "This is what happens when you hand real music to a pop singer." Everyone froze. Linda didn't argue. She didn't cry. She packed up, walked out, and never returned. Later, she would call him brilliant but brutal, the kind of man who mistook cruelty for genius. He wasn't just a missed opportunity, he was a turning point, a reminder that intellect without empathy is poison. But if Zappa hurt her pride, David Crosby wounded something far more personal. In the haze of Laurel Canyon, Crosby and Ronstadt were like musical kin, cut from the same countercultural cloth, harmonizing not just on stage, but in life, until 1978. During a studio session, Linda requested a key change, simple, professional. But Crosby brushed her off. "You should learn to adapt," he snapped. The tension exploded. The argument spilled beyond the studio, into headlines, into whispers. Then came the final blow. In Rolling Stone, Crosby labeled her manufactured, implying her success was more image than artistry. Linda never replied publicly. She never needed to. But within her circle, his name became forbidden. His tracks vanished from tour playlists, and she quietly made sure his shadow never touched her stage again. To her, Crosby's betrayal wasn't about disagreement. It was about disrespecting a shared history, a shared ideal. And then came the insult that cut through in public like a knife. Unprovoked, unnecessary, and unforgettable. Elvis Costello. In 1979, during a festival in Cleveland, Costello, drunk, defiant, and trying to impress, mocked her performance as background music for brunch. It was cruel and worse, deliberate. When she confronted him backstage, hoping for clarity or maybe even an apology, he doubled down with a smirk and walked away. Linda didn't chase, didn't argue, but the remark stuck. Because Costello wasn't just a rude newcomer. He represented a shift, a generation of artists more interested in tearing down than building up. To Linda, he wasn't rebellious, he was hollow, a symbol of cleverness without compassion. But the most painful name wasn't tied to drunken kisses or sharp headlines. It was someone whose voice once seemed destined to match hers. Paul Simon. In 1982, their planned duet had all the makings of a masterpiece. But behind studio doors, Simon nitpicked every phrase, corrected her delivery, and rewrote lyrics without her input. She later said it felt like being scolded by a principal. What was supposed to be a creative fusion became an autopsy. The song was never finished, and she never stepped into a studio with him again. For Linda, it wasn't about perfection. It was about partnership. What she got instead was control, and that hurt more than any lyric ever could. Now, decades later, Linda Ronstadt has chosen to speak, not for revenge, but for truth. These stories aren't tabloid drama. They're the scars behind the songs. The reason she sang with such fire. The reason she protected her dignity with such fierce grace. Because every harmony has a dissonance. Every legacy, its shadows. And sometimes the greatest strength isn't in the songs we perform, but in the silence we finally choose to break. Which of these stories surprised you the most? And do you think Linda was right to stay silent for so many years? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and as always, thanks for listening.